So I'm going to be talking about today why mental health days should be implemented into schools. So the CDC reports that 1 in 6 kids experience a mental illness. So I pose a question, why aren't mental health days excused absence instead? So although some school districts can provide great support for students that are struggling, the fact of the matter is that if students were allowed to take mental health days, it could slow the growing epidemic of mental illness among young children. The Variable Mind reports that the epidemic of mental health is only growing more in the past few years. It increased from 5.4 to 8.2% in kids ages 3 to 17 experiencing anxiety and depression. So why is this trend on the rise? With mental illness only becoming more prevalent in society, it's becoming easier for parents and teachers to recognize the signs of mental illness. So some signs in younger children can include frequent tantrums, often talking about fears or worries, complaining about stomach aches or headaches with no known medical reason, are in constant motion and can't slow down except for playing video games or watching movies. In older children, some of the signs can include lost interest in activities that they once really enjoyed, low energy, bad sleeping patterns, sleeping too much or too little, and spending time isolating themselves or alone. 1/3 of youth is experiencing mental illness, but most of them don't seek the proper treatment that they need. So it's the graph that shows some of the treatments that people are getting, which is not really a lot considering those are such low percentages in comparison to how many kids are actually struggling. The American College of Obstetrics estimated that about 1/2 all psychiatric disorders are diagnosed by age 14. So maybe what are some of the main types of mental illnesses that kids often struggle with? The first being depression. So some may not even talk about the feelings that they're experiencing or that they are depressed, and they can also be classified as other behavioral issues because sometimes younger kids especially will act out instead of just expressing how they feel because they don't know how to communicate it. They may not appear sad or may cause them to get into trouble, and in some extreme cases, it can lead to also suicidal thoughts. In the ages 10 to 24, suicide is the second leading cause of death. And the CDC reports that 20% of all teens experience depression at some point in their life. Next is anxiety. Some kids may say that they're anxious, or that they're nervous, or that they're always worried, but some kids may not say anything at all, and they're kind of trapped in their own thoughts. Some signs of this include recurring fears or worries about routine things in life, such as going to school, going to social interactions, avoiding activities, so wanting to skip out or make up excuses as to not to go to school. And between 2007 and 2012, the New York Times reported that anxiety disorders have increased by 20%. Some factors that may cause kids to have higher anxiety include high expectations by parents or peers or anyone around them, pressure to succeed by, again, those important people that they look up to in their life, or social media, or intimidation by their peers or basically anyone around them. Next is ADHD, which stands for Attention Hyperdeficit Disorder. And this is developed with a pattern of inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. So sometimes it's really hard for kids to pay attention or focus in class and sit still. Hyperactivity is one of the most common, especially in young children. It's often hard to distinguish whether it is hyperactivity or it's just a kid being a kid. Impulsivity is another sign that most people don't notice, but it's people just acting on their impulses and doing things very chaotically with no good reasoning behind it. And the CDC says that the number of estimated kids diagnosed with ADHD is 6.1 million, which is a lot if you think about it. So you may be wondering, how does school play a role in all of this in mental health and mental illness? So since school can often be a very good resource for kids, they offer counseling services or support groups, and it can also reduce things such as scheduling conflicts or fear of missing class because they can get it excused. And so this allows for early identification, prevention, and interventions where they can get parents and other staff involved to know as well. And so the National Alliance of Mental Health reports that 1 in 6 youth have a mental health condition like anxiety or depression, but only one half of those people are actually receiving the proper treatment for it. Mental health services are often really common in these school districts, but sometimes kids won't always reach out to them. Untreated mental health conditions can lead down a bad path of high high school dropout rates, substance abuse, arrest, incarceration, and kids don't know often where to turn after this. Removing barriers such as transportation or fear of speaking out can get kids the right help that they need, and it can also help, especially in areas of low income or in communities of color, where sometimes these outside resources aren't available to them. Investing in mental health can improve kids and the communities that they live in. But on the other hand, I think we can all agree that school can only add more stress and anxiety to someone who's not even struggling with mental illness. Kids have to go to school regardless. They don't have a choice. But for someone struggling with mental illness, this can lead to chronic absence, low achievement, and bad behavior. The Association for Kids Mental Health says that youth with emotional and behavioral disorders have the worst graduation rate of all kids with disabilities. Only 40% of kids with disabilities will graduate, in turn, which is the national average is 70%. So that is a pretty big difference. 50% of students with emotional and behavioral disorders drop out. So this is a map of the graduation rates of kids with disabilities. So in some states this is really, really high, but in states like Nevada it's 26%, which if you think about 26% of a class graduating, that is really scary. And that also doesn't lead kids down a clear path for success. So mental illness can affect both academic and social aspects of school. The story from the New York Times about a girl named Katie who moved schools when she was 8. And as soon as she moved schools, she was bullied for her weight and the way that she looked. So she started to cut herself with razor blades every single day after school. No teacher, student, peer noticed at all. And she said that if someone just were to ask if she was okay, she would have told them what was wrong and she could have received treatment. But 10 years later, she still had never gone to counseling once. So from 8 to 18, she was cutting herself and no one asked, no one knew, and she never got the help that she needed. So although school is a great resource, but it can be a detriment, mental health days will improve retention and learning. Some states already do have this legislation, like Oregon and Utah. They're probably the best examples of this because they've implemented this policy for a few years now. Some states to follow include California, New York, and Florida. These are states that already have the legislation working, but other states are also advocating for it to start the legislation process as well, which include Connecticut, Illinois, Arizona, Colorado, and Mississippi. Oregon law states that students can have 5 mental health days a year, and they can take these days as excused absences anytime they want, so they can work as sick days. And this law was actually inspired by the Parkland High School shooting in Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, because after that time, the students were going through so much grieving and trauma, but a lot of them were scared to miss school because they were scared they were going to fall behind. So they implemented mental health days, and now they're implementing this into other states. And a survey from the Mental Health America Association said they surveyed what would be the top 3 reasons that kids would be able to go to school even if they were struggling with mental health issues. And they had said that all they wanted was excused absences and excused assignments. 61% of mental health, 61% of people, students, have struggled with mental health, but only 26% of people can say that they've actually taken a mental health day. Allowing mental health days would also bridge the gap between physical and mental health. Because why are students allowed to stay home if they have a cold, but if they mentally cannot get out of bed and get themselves to go to school, it's important to bridge the gap and understand the connection between mind and body. So there are many health benefits behind mental health days as well. One of the most important ones is that teens who leave school will be able to go to therapy appointments. So if they're not comfortable going to maybe therapy at school, or maybe their school doesn't have access to that, they're going to be able to miss school and go to therapy. If students struggle with panic attacks and they have a panic attack in the morning, they can miss school. And if they're dealing with trauma or grieving, they don't have to be scared to miss. There was a girl named Chloe Wilson who died of suicide in Oregon, and her parents claimed that it was because she was so stressed out with school that she was scared to miss a day. And she said only she was able to take one mental health day, she thinks that it would have saved her daughter, which is why we started Breaking Silence. There is so much. Integrate mental health education into school would also benefit as well, not even just taking mental health days, but being able to spend time outside and a break from the classroom. Or if implementing block scheduling would make it a lot easier to miss class or to have that time to recuperate like in study halls. So in conclusion, mental health issues are at an all-time high and they're only rising. School services are not becoming enough, and it is so important for students to be able to take days off. Mental health days would also reduce the stigma that exists around mental health and create conversations amongst families. So some ways you can advocate is to talk to your state legislators, have conversations with your families and your parents and your teachers, basically everyone around you, and also just to check in on your friends because you never know what they're going